What is up, my beautiful gemstones? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing Night Siege, Rome, Ohio, 1981, Part 2. If you didn't watch part 1 of this video, then I would highly recommend going back and watching that one first. It aired last week on Monday, and I will leave a link to it in the description box below. I know I left off when things were just getting highly strange, incredibly bizarre, and all around really good, so to speak. I want to take the time really quickly, though, to remind everyone that what we're discussing in this case actually happened to real people, and I'm sure they sustained very real trauma from it. If any of you have any strange or bizarre encounters with extraterrestrials, interdimensional entities, anything paranormal or supernatural, please feel free to email them to me, as I am in the mood to do another listener encounters video. With all of that being said, we left off with the paranormal investigator and author Dennis Polichis realizing that there was more than just one family having these types of strange and bizarre experiences with entities from other realms, dimensions, and possibly other planets as well. Robert and his family were basically being tortured and tormented by their encounters with these strange and dangerous creatures, and not a single person on that farm, whether they lived there or visited, was safe. Before we get started, though, I would like to thank my patrons, my members, and everyone else who supports me in any way, shape, or form with this channel, my brand, or my business. I cannot thank you all enough for making my channel what it is, helping me get my name, brand, and business out there. Also, for those of y'all who help me financially especially, I honestly can't express how grateful I am to be able to do what I love for a living solely based on your love, support, and generosity. The fact that you guys believe in me and support me so much has saved me from myself and from giving up so many different times. Now, with all that being said, and without anything else, let's jump right into part 2 of Night Siege, Rome, Ohio, 1982, part 2. The standoffs with interdimensional beings. So, with as crazy and scary as everything happening in Rome on Robert's farm was, Dennis found eventually that this family weren't the only people having all kinds of strange and bizarre experiences with unknown creatures. As part of his investigation, Dennis Polichis came across some very concerning encounters and occurrences from nearby to Rome as well. In the nearby town of Rock Creek, one Friday night that summer, in the middle of July and at sometime around midnight, a young man was walking along the railroad tracks, taking a shortcut home from visiting with his grandmother. Seriously though, could you get anything more innocent to be doing or to have just done than visiting your grandma and walking the tracks home afterwards? The tracks in this spot had been removed long before the night in question, but the path of the old railroad remained there, and it provided very easy access between this young man's grandmother's house and his own home. As he was walking along quietly and minding his own business, everything suddenly felt oddly still and went incredibly silent. That's very familiar if you watch this channel regularly. That's what made this sudden and seemingly random grunting and moaning sounds that this young man started to hear that were coming from nearby. It made it all the more unnerving. He looked around and eventually realized that the noises were coming from both sides of the tracks, but from somewhere along the tree lines. He first tried to ignore the sounds and figured it had nothing to do with him, and maybe it was just some strange animal that he hadn't ever heard them make sounds before, right? He figured if he ignored it and didn't bother it, maybe it would return the favor and leave him alone as well. He figured wrong, though, and had no such luck. As he quickly walked along to try and get home, or at least away from whatever seems to be now stalking him, the noises started to come from directly behind him. He gathered all of his strength and courage and turned to face and confront whatever was coming up on him from behind. There was nothing on this earth that could have prepared him for what he was about to come face to face with. No more than 20 feet in front of him, he saw what he described as, quote, a big, black, ugly, hairy creature, end quote, that stood at around 9 feet tall and that he said had the general appearance of, quote, an overgrown gorilla with long arms hanging below the waist and really long legs, end quote. The creature was so large and seemingly so strong that the kid knew instinctively that his rifle would have little to no effect on it, so he decided not to bother even trying to shoot shoot at it. Instead, he turned and ran as fast as he could to try to get out of there. As he ran for his life, he could distinctly hear the creature chasing after him. But he said it wasn't running after him, but walking very quickly at an increased and heavy pace. He ran for several minutes until finally he had no choice but to stop and catch his breath. And when he stopped, the creature also stopped, though it was still making bizarre grunting sounds. Our witness reasoned with himself that this would have been the perfect time for the creature to have attacked him, had that been its intention. It was with that thought in his mind that he turned to face the creature again, and he saw it was standing around 15 feet away from him, but making no attempts to advance towards him in any way. It was almost as though it was merely interested in him as he was in it, and they were both kind of checking one another out or summing one another up. The creature, after a minute of them staring at one another curiously, did make a grunting sound at the young man, which kind of shocked him back into reality and made him rethink standing there any longer or possibly approaching whatever this thing was. And so he did turn around and start running for his life again. The creature, once again, gave chase, still walking quickly and not quite running after him. Just by chance, and maybe if you ask the young man by a bit of divine intervention, depending on what you believe, our witness came across a little path carved into the cornfield that ran parallel to this abandoned train track, and he decided to turn into the pathway and try to get home faster by taking the route through the corn instead of sticking to the route on the tracks. He actually realized he knew this pathway well because he had helped many others create it by riding his bikes through the cornfield after riding on the tracks and exiting it many times before during this journey from his grandmother's house to his house. He ran down this path as fast as his legs could carry him, and I don't blame him, but for me, I think once I saw that it wasn't going to attack me, I might have been emboldened to gently and cautiously, very easily approach it, but of course, that's neither here nor there, and that's just me and the way my mind works. But let me know in the comments what you guys think about that. Eventually, the young man didn't think he heard anything following behind him anymore, and when he turned to look, he saw that the creature had continued on the tracks and hadn't turned with him into the path of the corn. I've got to stop here and ask, why do you all think the creature didn't follow him into the corn after having followed him for so long along the tracks before this? I wonder if maybe it's something to do with the laws that shape our reality and those of wherever this thing came from. Was it not able to get off the tracks or go into the corn or something like that? Anything's possible, but of course, without knowing exactly what we're dealing with or what this thing was, I have no way of knowing for sure. So I am pretty curious as to what you guys think about this. Believe it or not, though, this wasn't our witness's only encounter with this beastly thing, this beastly entity. And after he had told several of his friends about his strange and terrifying experience with it, they all decided to go back with him to the old railroad where he had first seen it and where it had all begun. It was several days later after the first time he had encountered it, and they were there to basically see if the thing had returned at all, were there any signs that it had been back at all, or if it would come back with him and other people there. The creature didn't disappoint, and after only being there and looking around for a few minutes, they all started to hear strange grunting noises coming from somewhere in the woods nearby to them on the tracks. Before any of them could really say anything or even really register what was happening, the creature appeared right in front of them, several yards up ahead on the track. One of the witnesses was so scared that, without even thinking about it, or so he claimed, he raised his gun and shot at the beast. The creature fell to the ground and stayed there for a few minutes while the horrified witnesses stood stone still in shock, waiting to see what it would do next or if it would even get up at all. Could they approach it? But it did get up, having to seemingly drag itself back to its feet, and clearly injured, it limped in a somewhat run back into the woods. This kind of pissed me off, guys. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, this thing showed no violence toward the original witness the first time and showed no signs of violence, didn't even have a chance really to show any violence if it wanted to towards him or his friends when they went back there a few days later, and this idiot still found the need to shoot at and possibly injure it. Possibly he could have even killed it. That's really annoying and exactly why we will never be able to actually prove the existence of any of these entities, including Bigfoot, in my opinion. Anyway, as it dragged/ran itself back into the woods, it let out a blood-curdling scream that chilled the witnesses to their bones. Dennis Polichis investigated this witness and his claims and found that this young man was an upstanding and very well-respected member of his community, and he had no reason to want to become involved in any sort of hoax or to lie. Also, lending even more credibility to his story were several people who lived all along those old abandoned tracks where the original witness and then he and his friends say their encounters happened. They all said they would hear strange grunting sounds, high-pitched squeaks, squeals, and screams coming from the area of the tracks all the time at all hours of the night when it was dark. The sounds were described most often as, quote, strange and high-pitched, end quote. Dennis and his team, not to mention other investigators throughout the years, investigated these old tracks to see if they would experience anything for themselves or maybe even come across the creature or a creature itself. And some of them ended up finding several three-toed foot impressions in the area. Dennis's team found several of those strange foot impressions as well. The events happening to Robert and his family on their farm in Rome, Ohio in the summer of 1981 that we covered most of in the first video last week continued on for the rest of the summer that year and stretched into the last month or two of that year before suddenly stopping altogether and all at once. These events, despite being investigated for decades by many different teams of all different sorts and kinds of investigators, Dennis and his team included, are largely unsolved and remain very mysterious as to what could have been going on and what Robert, his family, and even those Amish men with those workhorses could have been dealing with. Let's talk about it now and go over some of the things that really stood out to me about not only what happened to Robert and his family on their farm, but to other witnesses in the area as well. Remember that Dennis Polichis believed that there were at least 2 and possibly even 3 different types of entities involved in the months-long siege of Robert's farm. Also, I couldn't believe it when the creatures with the red eyes were seemingly trying to create a diversion as they moved themselves from where the family was watching from the roof and looking into the woods and closer to the house while hanging close to the side of the barn. Now, I'm not making any definitive statements here, but come for me if you want. I also couldn't help but notice that the descriptions given by the witnesses on the railroad tracks and those of the red-eyed creatures from the farm are very similar in nature to what we've come to know as Bigfoot creatures. I've said it many times before, and it was finally confirmed for me, and that's that Bigfoot creatures with black fur or hair are much different in that they're much more aggressive and attack much more often than those with brown fur or hair, who, by the way, almost never are reported as having red eyes. The ones with black fur are often reported with red eyes, but not always either. There's also the fact that many UFO researchers have said that there appears to be a definite connection between UFO sightings and Bigfoot encounters, with UFO hotspots also being reportedly the homes of Bigfoot and their nests a lot of the time as well, more often than not actually. Don't believe me that there are experts that are saying this? See for yourself, because one of the researchers or experts that I'm talking about here is the late, great John Keel himself. John Keel theorized that the intelligence behind UFOs could possibly be, quote, sending out, end quote, Bigfoot creatures by way of creating diversions or distractions. Was that closer to the truth than most people are willing to admit? And is that what's going on here? Let's not forget, too, that whatever these things were that were on the farm terrorizing this family, and regardless of how many different types of them there were, these things had the ability to morph and shapeshift. Remember in the first video how one of them made itself look like one of the family's horses to try and lure them off the roof or at least into the field? This really kept nagging at me in the back of my head all throughout my research, and I think I finally figured out why. Try and stay with me here and let me know what you all think about this theory in the comments. But what if both or all 3 of these entities were actually the same creatures, just manifested in a different way? The dark shadowy figures with the blue lights and the dark red-eyed creatures were both one and the same, basically, is my theory. I'm not saying this is the case absolutely, but I am more than willing to consider it and would love to hear what you guys think about that. So throughout my research, I couldn't find much more about any of this, but I did find at least one more report on record that's very similar to what happened in 1981 in Rome, Ohio. It happened about 3 decades earlier. It happened in Kentucky, But it didn't last as long as the several months this went on for in Rome. It happened on the night of August 21st, 1955, and we've discussed this encounter here on this channel before, but it would be ridiculous if I didn't bring it up now while talking about what happened on Robert's farm in the summer of 1981 in Rome. At the time I covered what happened to the Sutton family, I hadn't ever heard about what happened on Robert's farm to his family, and so I couldn't make the connections I was able to make this time after familiarizing myself with Robert's family's situation. If that made sense when I was writing it, but I don't know if it made sense out loud, so let me know. So, on August 21st, 1955, the Sutton family were entertaining their friends, the Taylor family, on their farm, which was located around 8 miles away and out in the middle of nowhere from the smaller town of Hopkinsville, Kentucky. The Taylors had traveled all the way from Pennsylvania to Kentucky to see their friends, and this farm was very far out of the way from any and all other civilizations. Billy Ray Taylor left the gathering inside the home to go outside and get some water from the well, which wasn't too far away from the house. As he walked to the well in the dark, he noticed something in the sky. It was a glowing object that he said appeared to be, quote, on fire with all the colors of the rainbow, end quote. He watched in awe as the object descended into some nearby trees and landed just out of his view behind them. Billy turned and ran back to tell everyone at the main house what had just happened and what he had just witnessed. He ran into the house and immediately blurted out that he had, quote, just seen a flying saucer, end quote. Everyone looked up at him and contemplated what he had just said for about a minute before going right back to whatever they had been doing and or talking about before he came rushing in. They were used to Billy Ray having a strange sense of humor and didn't pay him much mind at the time. However, just then, one of the dogs started frantically barking and otherwise behaving erratically, and that got everyone's attention again. The dog was snarling and growling at something outside, which led everyone out onto the front porch to see what was happening and what had gotten the usually calm dog so riled up. As they opened the door to go outside onto the porch, they accidentally let the dog out in the process, but instead of running towards the woods where its focus seemed to have been, the animal just ran quickly under the porch and cowered under there, growling and moaning at something it was obviously very terrified of, but that it didn't want to really approach. The family was so disturbed by how the dog was acting, they all went inside and locked the doors behind them, with each of them going to a window to look out and see if they could tell what was going on. It's like they could feel it in the air that something was very wrong. As they stared out into the darkness of the night, they could all clearly hear the frightened whines and howls of the poor dog that they had left outside. They had tried to coax it in before going in themselves, but it was seemingly too terrified to move and even snapped its teeth at its owners for trying to pull it out from under the house in order to bring it inside to safety. Eventually, Billy Ray and the Suttons' oldest son, whose name was Lucky, went outside again to investigate what in the hell was going on here. Within moments of stepping outside, Lucky noticed a bright green, strange-looking glowing object up ahead of him in the sky, and it was headed right in his and Billy Ray's direction. He called out and yelled for everyone else, telling them what he was seeing and that it was rapidly approaching them and the house. As the object got closer to the property, everyone was eventually able to see that the small glowing object, which was now on the ground but still approaching the house very slowly, was actually, quote, a small humanoid figure, end quote. The figure continued its slow approach, but then it suddenly stopped as though it had become aware that the family could see it and was watching it. It threw its arms up in the air and shot towards the house at lightning speed. Lucky and Billy Ray aimed their guns at the being and opened fire on it while it was still in the air. Almost every single one of their shots had hit the target, but the bullets seemed to do nothing other than continuously flip the figure over and around, and eventually it landed on its feet and ran into the surrounding woods, again at lightning speed. Billy Ray and Lucky were scared and very confused, and they immediately turned back and went into the house to tell the others what they'd just been through. As they were explaining everything to the others in the house, they saw out of the corner of their eyes, quote, a goblin creature, end quote, staring into one of the side windows and just leering at the family and glaring at them. Once again, Billy Ray and Lucky started shooting at the creature, giving almost no thought to the fact that they were inside the house and now shooting their guns off indoors. Once again, despite several shots hitting the creature dead on target, the shots achieved nothing except seemingly to stun it a little bit. Just like the first creature, this one quickly recovered and ran for the nearby trees in the woods surrounding the property. This is when they realized there were many more of the creatures than they had initially thought outside. and Billy Ray, with Lucky covering him, ran towards the back door. He only managed to take a step or two outside out of the back door when something reached down from the roof and grabbed him, pulling him up quickly into the air by a clump of his hair. The goblin-like creature on the roof had grabbed him, and it was now very clear that it was wearing some sort of silvery one-piece suit, now that they saw it more up close. Lucky raised his weapon and fired off at the being, which in response merely floated to the ground very slowly and, quote, floated off, end quote, into the surrounding woods. Lucky and Billy Ray made their way back into the house, obviously terrified and somewhat disoriented at what was happening all around them and what had just happened to them, what they had experienced out there. As they were walking quickly back to the house to try and get inside and regroup, they saw several more of the goblin-like creatures all standing along the woodlands in the tree line, and there was even one on the roof of another building on the property not too far off from where they were walking. Another one stood inside one of the trees, like in its branches, all of them watching the two human men silently and intently. The men were terrified at this point, and I guess they were like on a hairpin trigger because they opened fire once again, and once again the creatures were hit but unharmed and seemingly unfazed as well. Then, suddenly and all at once, all of the glowing green creatures seemingly disappeared into thin air. They were no longer visible to Lucky and Billy Ray at all, but there had been no warning of their departure at all either. Lucky and Billy Ray each took their family into their vehicles to try and drive away and off the property. They sped off and met up at the Hopkinsville police station. The two vehicles arrived at the police station at 11 that night, and everyone piled out of the vehicles and ran in, telling whoever was on duty and whoever would listen that they had been battling strange, green, glowing, goblin-like creatures for hours up at their farm, and that they very desperately needed assistance immediately. Obviously, guys, the officers were very skeptical, but despite how strange and nonsensical it all sounded, they agreed to go to the farm and see what was happening out there. Several officers did go back with the family to see if they could figure out what was happening or offer any kind of assistance. One of the officers said that while they didn't totally believe what the families were claiming that had happened, that it was clear to many of them by the sheer panic and desperation in their voices that they had definitely had something happen to them. And that's the main reason why they went along with it and accompanied them back to the farm. Once they all arrived at the farm, the police investigated the property themselves, looking for any clues or evidence as to what could be going on, and it didn't take long for them to find something that led them to believe that they were possibly in way over their heads, and that the families hadn't been too far off from the truth after all. One officer said he saw, quote, a strange glowing, end quote, coming from the nearby woods, but none of the officers there that night could see any creatures themselves. Whatever they saw or thought they could have been dealing with, it was enough for them to be concerned enough to contact nearby Fort Campbell and ask for military assistance. The military promptly arrived and carried out a full sweep of the entire area surrounding the farm and the farm itself, but they said they couldn't find anything at all. Eventually, and after a long while of investigating but coming up completely empty-handed, both the military and the police left, and the family were allowed back on the farm by themselves. Not too long after they got back and were alone, the creatures returned. The two terrified families then spent the next several hours engaged in combat with these strange goblin-like extraterrestrial, interdimensional creatures. There were many shots fired and lots of terror and confusion just for the creatures to vanish a little while before first daylight hit the skies at around 5 in the morning. They were seemingly gone for good, leaving behind no explanation as to what they were, why they were there, or really of anything else. While I just referred to them as extraterrestrial creatures or interdimensionals, I want you to understand that they could have easily been one or the other, and as far as I know, they could each be one and the same. There's just not enough information on either entity for us to know anything about them to be sitting here and making assumptions or being presumptuous. The next day, an article about what had happened to the families on the small and out-of-the-way farm appeared in the Kentucky New Era newspaper, and with it came a whole slew of paranormal investigators, UFO researchers, and general looky-loos from all across the country. This was a nationwide thing that, the whole nation was watching unfold. With all of this increased attention, there came the inevitable increased skepticism and scrutiny. Because of how skeptical most people were and how they felt they were being treated in such a negative and sometimes even a mocking manner, both the Sutton and Taylor families began to pull back away from any sort of public or media attention. They quickly tired of people saying that they were trying to orchestrate a hoax and of people mocking and ridiculing not only their story, but who they were as people. In the book called Close Encounter at Kelly, investigators Isabel Davis and Ted Blocher documented how it was Billy Ray who was mostly and mainly accused of being the one who orchestrated this hoax. This was largely due to the fact that he insisted he had seen, quote, a spaceship, end quote, land in the woods before they engaged in battle with the creatures who allegedly sprang forth from it. Many people thought that because Billy Ray would talk to anyone and everyone about all of the events from that night, that it meant he was looking to gain financially from this so-called hoax. But in my opinion, it shouldn't matter what his motivations for talking about all of it were. And if he and his friends and family really did go through what they claimed to have gone through that night, and I wholeheartedly believe that they did, then I say each and every one of them deserves and has earned the right to not only talk openly about it, but to gain as much from it as they possibly can, financially and otherwise. At the end of the day, the farmhouse was destroyed. However, obviously not everyone sees things as I do, I guess, and many thought that his absolute willingness to talk about it all meant he was making it all up and looking to get rich quick from the story. Keep in mind, too, that these events weren't just witnessed by Billy Ray and Lucky, but by everyone in both families. That's an awful lot of witnesses to have to keep their story straight for all that time. It doesn't make sense to me, but this sort of extreme and accusatory skepticism never does. There have been a lot of bizarre theories put forth for what actually happened that night, and I couldn't possibly list them all here. I do want to talk about one of them specifically, though, because I just think it's the most ridiculous and galling that people could actually think this is more believable than space creatures, and it just baffles me, and I would make fun of whoever came up with this theory if I were able to speak to or get an interview with them. So get this. The theory was put forth that perhaps it was a group of great horned owls local to the area that the families had been up in arms against and under siege by that night. This theory actually was considered to have held water by most people because the descriptions given of the creatures by both the Taylors and the Suttons allegedly matched almost perfectly what this breed of owl looks like. Oh, really? This makes sense, right? That owls are green, they glow, they wear silver suits. Is it really reasonable to believe that normal thinking human beings would mistake literal owls for glowing green goblin extraterrestrial creatures wearing green suits and floating around? If you understand this, then by all means, please explain it to me in the comments, because it just seems so asinine to me right now. In his book called Unexplained, Jerome Clark sifted through this explanation, and he called to light the fact that all the witnesses had said that when their bullets struck the creatures, the sound they heard, quote, resembled bullets striking a metal bucket, end quote. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but this certainly isn't the sound bullets make when hitting the flesh of a living, breathing creature, an animal like an owl. Jerome Clark also highlighted the fact that one of the police officers saw, quote, an odd luminous patch, end quote, near a fence where the creatures were said to have been shot and shot at. There was actually a trail of the same green luminous stuff from where a creature was said to have been hit, all along creating a path in the woods where Billy Ray said it had run back into the woods after he had shot it. Ultimately, he said, quote, investigations done by police, Air Force officers from nearby Fort Campbell, and civilian ufologists found absolutely no evidence of a hoax, end quote. Today, more than half a century later, this case is still very much of interest to paranormal investigators, ufologists, and all sorts of researchers within the community, and many wonder if it really could be the case that extraterrestrial creatures resembling glowing green goblins really had a violent standoff with two families in the middle of nowhere in the woods on a rural farm in Kentucky. I left out a lot of details in this one simply because we covered it on this channel before, and it has its own video dedicated to it here on this channel, which I will leave right at the top of the description box for you to all go and watch again if you want to. Right underneath that link will be the link for last week's video, the part 1 to this one, with all of the information I could find about what really happened in Rome, Ohio throughout the summer of 1981 on Robert's farm. I suggest you watch both when you have time and before watching this video, though if you've gotten this far, it's probably too late for that now. Go and watch them anyways, please. It'll be more than worth it if this is something you're really interested in, if you want to know more. I can't end this video without asking you guys the inevitable question, or at least it's inevitable in my mind. Could it be that goblin entities from Kentucky, those goblin-like entities, were the same entities only in a different form, manifested in a different way as the ones from Ohio in 1981? It's possible, knowing what I know now, and at least in my humble opinion, but if you don't agree with me, then let me know in the comments, but also let me know why. I could go on and on, actually, with encounters that could be related to what we discussed here in Ohio, but sometimes I do think it's a moot point because we simply don't know enough collectively, and we don't know enough information as fact to be able to really sort out what's going on, what we're dealing with from one case to another, where any of these entities are coming from, why they're here, why they choose to come, and where they do, when they do, and the list of unknowns and variables go on and on as well. Let me know what you all think in the comments below, please, guys. That's all I have for you today. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content. If you enjoyed hanging out with me, spread the love, please, by sharing this video. You guys have helped me grow so quickly in the last year and a half, but now it's like starting to slow down. I want to get to like 10,000 subscribers by the end of this year or more. And it is possible with your guys sharing, liking, leaving at least 7 words in the comments. I think even 7 emojis might work. Guys, check out the description box for some important links, ways to donate to the channel, because your donations are the main way that I get paid. PayPal, Cash App, my Amazon wish list, gift link. The link for all of my books, Kindle, paperback, and Audible, will be in the description box. But if you're looking for a book of mine that you can't find, just go to Amazon and type in Gemma Jade Books. My newest book, Gone Mysterious Disappearances, Volume 4 is out, Kindle, paperback, and Audible, and that link will be in the description box. I'm pretty sure I popped it in there. Again, though, you can go to Amazon and type in Gemma Jade Books. You will see my entire 10 or 11 book collection. Guys, please make sure you support the short videos that I do on this channel. I know a lot of y'all don't like watching the shorts. To me, that's kind of odd because like they're anywhere from 4 to 59 seconds. Like most of them aren't even a minute long. If you support those, you like those, you comment on those, you share those out. I try to be funny. I try to be charming. I try to be silly. I even dance for y'all sometimes. Like I try to do the absolute most in those shorts to make you guys laugh and to make them enjoyable for you. So please give me the courtesy and decency of liking them, watching them at least once, sharing them, commenting, all the same stuff I need you guys to do on these videos. If you're over on TikTok, hit me up, GemmaJadeYT. If you're on Facebook, it's just Gemma Jade. You'll see my profile picture there because there are a couple of us, or several of us actually. Until the next one, be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Be kind to yourselves and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. If nobody told you today, you're amazing, you're incredible, you are beautiful, you are wonderful, you are fabulous. You can do anything you put your mind to and that you set your mind to. Surround yourself with the right positive-minded, relentless, audacious people. I believe in you. I got your back. Always go in grace. Smile at a stranger. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.